literally. So welcome to the Novel Idea Society. It is a book club that is a partnership between CBC Saskatchewan and the Regina Public Library. So we are currently in a branch of the library in Regina, but also have people online, and it'll also be recorded so that people who missed on the conversation can watch it later. You are like the highlight of my week because this book dominated my weekend. I couldn't put it down. My boyfriend kept saying to me, "You must really like that book because you've been carrying it around." And I read it in 2 days. It is fabulous. So I have to say,
thank
for the
you.
first book, it's amazing. What kind of feedback are you getting on it? I mean, after I've gloated, now tell me how people are telling you how good it is.
Yeah, no, I feel like the reception has been really generous, which has been lovely to hear and see. So things have been, really kind. Thank you so much for saying that.
So it's your first book, but it
Yep.
started from a short story. I have not read the short story. Can you tell me which part of Bad Cree, was the short story that you started with?
A lot of the elements that are in the short story are in the novel. So, I mean, the main premise of our protagonist, Mackenzie, being able to bring things back and forth from her dreams, that's all in there. How it starts, her waking up and being like, what's going on, is the exact same. And I basically, the other elements in the short story, I just teased out into making the fuller novel it is now. And then also, incorporated characters that were really living in my mind, because I kept thinking about Mackenzie and just thinking about her world and who was in it and what their interactions would be and what was at the heart of sort of this loneliness that was really with her in the short story. A lot of it stayed.
How much of this story is your own lived experience? Because it is such a vivid book that you feel like you are living in someone's head.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have had experiences very similar to Mackenzie's. I'm a millennial Cree woman who has lived in Vancouver, away from her family members. And, I've moved back to the prairies now. I live in Edmonton now. But, the ways she thinks about the difference of Vancouver and the land that she inhabits in Vancouver and the land and the space that she inhabits at home are very much thoughts and things that I thought about as well. Both places are so beautiful, and they're so beautiful in their own way. They're so different. And so when I lived in Vancouver, I was thinking about that difference a lot, and thinking about what it meant for me as a Cree person to be living on, unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. And I've also experienced loss in my life, as many Indigenous people have, if not directly, then certainly community-wide. And so the feelings of, and the sort of reverence for and fear of, and obsession in a way with grief and loss are certainly things that I have thought about as well.
Are some of the settings, I'm thinking particularly about Alberta.
Yes.
I feel like I could envision those woods so very clearly. Is that a place that is special to you?
Yes. Yeah. So the lake where High Prairie, first of all, is the town that Mackenzie returns to and where her family is from and lives. And that is my family. I was born in Fort Vermilion, and my family has lived all over Treaty 8, Rainbow Lake, Peace River, sort of moving more and more south. And High Prairie is this, we never lived in High Prairie, but both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side, both live in High Prairie and East Prairie. And to this day live there. We have generations of family who live in this area. And so that was always, because we moved so much, that was always our constant. because that's where my grandparents lived, and so we would always go there every summer, and that's where I really, when I think of home, I really think of there. And the lake that is a big central focus in the novel is a real life lake that's Lesser Slave Lake in Cree territory. It is really close to Sucker Creek First Nation, a lot of First Nations around there, and Métis settlements live in and around that lake, and has a really big significance for so many people in that territory. My friend Emily Riddle, who I'm doing my book tour with at the moment, who just released her novel, she's in Nehiao, Isqueo. She released her poetry collection, The Big Melt, which is absolutely amazing. And she actually referred to this lake as the Cree Ocean, because it is so big and we're so landlocked that to us, we kind of, it was as close to the ocean as we could get. It's just this massive body of water, and has really big historical significance for a lot of Cree people in that area, a lot of Métis people in that area. And so it felt very fitting for it to be a character in the novel, and to have that significance there.
Would you call this a horror novel?
I would, actually, yeah. I think that there are traditional definitions of horror that were these genres that were in large part created by dominant white society. And I think a lot of people, traditional horror novel people, would likely not call this horror. And I think that Indigenous horror, and I think that, I think the Indigenous horror looks a little differently. And, I'm quite used to not fitting into these traditional, boxes, these genres. They just inherently, they won't fit the stories that I'm telling as a queer Indigenous person. What I like to call it, though, is emotional horror. I think that the emotions in the novel are really big. They're their own characters, and the kind of horror that the characters experience are emotional ones in a big way. And so that's the term I'm coining for it, is emotional horror.
We were talking about this before we logged on here. Courtney and I were talking about it as a horror novel, because she said it made the hair on the back of her hand, like the hair on the back of her head, stick up, in that it sticks with you. And I think there's something about that feeling of being watched, and that uneasiness that comes with not knowing, especially when you're in a big open space, whether it's a lake or a forest, of that being alone and not knowing, and then that question of what's reality and what's not, with that, in some cases, unreliable narrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with your story, when you first wrote the short story, how did it become a book? How did you go from short story to book, and to have such a successful first novel?
Well, I love short stories. I love reading them. I love writing them. And, I'd written quite a few up until the point that I wrote Bad Cree. And normally with the short stories, when I'd finished them, I really felt finished with them, and I'd move on to my next project, whatever it was. And with Bad Cree, I finished the short story, and it didn't leave me. The characters didn't leave me. I kept thinking, I was thinking about Mackenzie and her world, and what her life looked like, and where the story might go. And I knew that the short story wasn't the final iteration of what the story needed to be. I think that stories do, in a big way, really tell you what form they need to take to be fully realized. That might be poetry, that might be nonfiction, it might be cross-genre. Again, these boxes might not fit for a particular story. And the way that this story was sticking with me. The story told me, you know, I'm not done in this form. So I started the process of expanding it into a novel, which takes such different craft techniques than a short story does. It takes different skills, and I really had to work on those skills, and I had to expand like my own knowledge of this form. So I just started digging really deep, and I had great editors that really helped me to like say, you know, this needs to be built out more, or you know, we need to know more here, and became the novel that it is now.
I noticed in your acknowledgements that you thanked Eden Robinson, and we had read one of Cheryl Demoline's books earlier in the book club as well. Have you made contact with some of these other authors that you're having these similar, I don't want to say you've fallen into a genre because you haven't, it's one book, but it's the similar storyline. I'm wondering if you guys have connected with each other and if you've managed to compare notes with them about how they tell their stories.
I mean, so Eden was really influential for me in many ways. I loved Monkey Beach. I loved the Trickster series. And so when I was at UBC doing the creative writing MFA, she was a visiting prof that came over.
Way.
Yeah, so I got to connect with her there, and I hadn't even, Bad Cree wasn't even in my mind at that time, but I did get to connect with her, and she's so generous and warm and loving, and was so generous with advice and with, you know, answering any questions that I had. And then I went to BAM for a writing residency, and she was one of the mentors there. And she actually got to, I got to get her to be a first reader for Bad Cree, the novel. And she gave me amazing feedback. Some of it was like, as I say in my acknowledgements, she told me to go deeper and go darker. And to really lean into the dream sequences and these things that, you know, I kind of needed a little push of courage to do. And she really did that. And I'm so grateful for both her influence before she had a look at my work, and of course the impact that she's had on the work itself. And Cherie,
Cherie, I'm sorry, I mixed up her name.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes. Exactly who you're talking about. Cherie, actually, I think reading The Marrow Thieves was what that was the first time I had seen dreams and dreaming validated in the ways that I, as a Cree person, understand dreams to be validated and valid as so precious that in The Marrow Thieves, they're mined, so precious that people want to steal them. And so reading that, it just resonated with me in such a big way. I got to meet her at a literary festival or something. I was in the audience. She was like obviously a author, and tell her how much that work meant to me. And then, and she was so kind and generous, and like wanted to connect with all the like Indigenous emerging writers that were there, and wanted to connect with her. And then when I finished Bad Cree and was looking for people to blurb the book, I reached out to her, or my editor reached out to her. And, I'd written a note to her saying, like, your work has resonated with me in such a profound way. And then she was kind enough to blurb it. And, she reading it and reading her, comments on it were really amazing. So that's the ways that I've connected with them. We've not, like, as all published people, now sat down and been like, here are the ways that all of our works are the same or different. But it's really cool because we're all, coming from very different backgrounds. Like Cherie as a Métis person, I'm Cree. Like, it's just, as Indigenous people, we're so diverse in our cultures. And so to be able to collaborate and help each other in these ways, and also to acknowledge the differences between us as well, I think is also very important.
I think it's cool though too for you to have each other in a way where we're starting to see more and more Indigenous voices and more Indigenous storytelling show up in fiction and in nonfiction too, but to have each other to lean on in what did you do in this situation, and not even so much in your writing, but just in how you're dealing with people like me, or those public situations where you're like, I don't know what to do with this. This is all new to me. So it's nice to hear that they are embracing you in that way, so that you have those people to lean on in those circumstances. I ask every author this: are you a plotter or are you a fly by the seat of your pants writer?
Yeah, for the short story, I was a fly by the seat of my pants. And I would say even for like the first couple of drafts, I was very fly by the seat of my pants. And as I was expanding it, more thoroughly, I plotted out, and I learned a lot of, again, it was my first time doing this, so I learned a lot of big lessons. And a big one I learned for my next novel is that I am going to plot it out. I think that having some sort of structure, even if it changes, because as I'm doing it, again, the story will tell me if that's the right way or not. Having a structure and knowing in my head that this is what I'm going to do today helps me as a writer just to get the work done before going in and going through that editorial process.
Did you have to take a lot out? Did you have to add a lot through that learning process? Did you have to leave a lot, as they say, on the cutting room floor?
Yeah, a lot. From the first draft to what it is now, I honestly feel like I've written 4 different novels. What it was to what it is now, the caterpillar to a butterfly, very, very different. Lots of things have shifted. As I was going through like the final edits, I was still like thinking about scenes and stuff that had been in the first one. And I was like, oh, but does this happen before or after? And then editor would be like, no, that doesn't happen at all. We've cut that. But it was all, for good reason. And it's, I think, turned out the way it was supposed to. Well, I still think that now. I'm sure a little bit down the road, once I've had a bit of space from it, there will be things that I think like, I wish I did this or whatever. But for now, I'm happy with it.
I also noticed, I want to talk about the crows and I want to talk about the significance of that. But I also noticed while we were talking about acknowledgements that a lot of your aunties are named in the book.
Yep.
Did you ask permission? Did you do that as a surprise? Because a lot of the people you thanked end up being characters in your book.
Yes, they do. The one way in which I don't think I'm very creative is with names. I have a really hard time thinking of names that I just don't know. So I think when I first started writing, I actually used names that I knew as placeholders, and I was like, oh, I'll just think of different names later. But for right now, these 2 aunties, I'm going to use 2 of my aunties' names. The mom, I'm going to use my mom's name. I did that. And then as I got so far into the story, I couldn't think of any other name. Like, I was just like, now that is who they are. Like,
they became those people.
Changing the name would feel weird. So then they just ended up staying. I didn't ask permission. I did tell them, though. I told my auntie that, by the way, there's an auntie in the novel named after you. But they're all the characters are, like, I would say the aunties, the 2 aunties in it are like parts of personalities of a lot of my aunties put into one, and then parts of them put into the other one. Same thing with every other character. They're not like directly, somebody else, but certainly have elements of people they're named after.
Was it important for you to have someone who was non-binary in there with Jolie? I thought that was so interesting at first, because you don't see it often in books, popular books represented at all. And by the end, I found it, I didn't register with me at all, but I thought it was really cool that it just so seamlessly flowed. There was no explanation. This is just who this person is. Was that important for you to include?
Very, yeah. And, you know, one of the characters I keep thinking about is Jolie, because I am really interested to, I think about their life a lot. And I think about like what their life in Vancouver could look like. But it was really important for me to have a trans character in the novel, because the novel really celebrates women and femmes. And, you know, Jolie is a non-binary, is a two-spirit femme. You know, they have like the long hair, and they're just very fierce in their love for Mackenzie. And that was so important, because what I wanted to represent was the kind of life that a similar kind of love I experience in my life, which is all my aunties are fierce in their love for me, fierce in their protection. And that's my aunties who are my blood relation, and my aunties who are not blood related to me, but have that status in my life. And the trans people in my life and the women in my life are such pillars of strength and just like beauty and power around me, and have been my whole life. So it was really important that I had a complex and powerful character in there who was trans.
I think it's interesting. Jolie, the aunties are like pillars of protection, I felt like, around Mackenzie in different ways. And when you start seeing that interruption is, for me, I mean, the description of the things that Mackenzie sees are scary and horrible. But I think for me, it was that interruption of the communication for them. When I started getting the heebie-jeebies that like the universe has intervened, and now that these pillars are being threatened of her protection.
Yeah, and I think something that felt really important was like Mackenzie is a really imperfect character. I don't resonate a lot with especially like main character types that are you know, that are perfect, that make all the right moves, and that you know, I find Mackenzie to be really frustrating at times, because she does have these pillars of love and community around her that she cuts herself off from. Like, she refuses to be cared for in a lot of ways. She refuses to like accept love from them. Sometimes she does, and sometimes she has a hard time with that for various reasons that are very valid, but it can be very frustrating. And when those are interrupted and when those are threatened, I think is also when she starts to be like, oh, I really need to, like, I need to
that
get
brick in the head moment where you're like, oh, something's not right here.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk about the crows, because I know that crows are that trickster character, but I really, and I mean, we can talk spoilers here. That's how we roll in book club. If they haven't read it, too bad, they'll catch up. But I was really convinced that the crows were a bad thing, even up until the very switch at the end where you're like, oh, they're kind of like looking out for her. Was that, I mean, obviously it was intentional, but how did you wrestle with that as you were building the crows through the novel? Because I find crows really creepy, and my partner loves them and is on a quest to befriend the crow that lives on the fence outside of our house. So we regularly have crow battles in our house.
That is so funny. Yeah, I'm the partner that is like, let's feed the crows so they come back every day.
Like, but it's looking at me. Like, it's really looking at me. I feel like it can see inside my soul.
And they can.
That's not helping. That is not helping.
Yeah. So, you know, crows are used often in media, all kinds of media, whether that's film, TV, books, and they're used particularly in horror to elicit a certain type of eerie mood, or to make a scene have a particular kind of like scary, eerie vibe. And I love that. I think that's great. And also, yeah, they're a trickster figure, and yeah, I think that for me, subverting that and having them be this sort of eerie, ominous presence, and then be something that Mackenzie has to look more deeply into and sort of like face her first assumptions about them, I think is something I just found really interesting, because she makes a lot of assumptions about things that she's wrong about. I mean, when these dream things start happening to her, she calls her aunt and she's like, what's happening to me? Because she just assumes that her aunt, who, speaks Cree and is like, has cultural knowledge that she doesn't have, she must know.
Just has a crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly. And, she's kind of looking at her thinking, oh, this is going to be like the stoic, wise Indigenous person, often like misrepresented in media. And her aunt is like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's messed up, So Mackenzie's assumptions are really challenged throughout the novel. And I think it challenges reader assumptions as well. But also, you're kind of led into a trap, because the eeriness is very deliberate in how they're presented in the beginning. So yeah, I think the shift was just something that was, in terms of craft and in terms of Mackenzie's own realizations about things, seemed very fitting.
Okay, I can ask personal questions through this whole time because I love this so much. But I have people on Zoom. I have a room full of people here, so I want to open up to them. I can move my little microphone, such a technical device here, across the table and let them ask you the question. You're going to actually ask for yourself. Yes, look. You might have to come hither, because I will do that. You don't need to look at me.
Hi.
Hi.
So weird.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome to my life.
I was hoping you could speak a bit about the resource extraction element of the story, and because that was a bit of a surprise to me, and then I was really curious where you were going to go with it. And honestly, I thought, I was like, I wonder, like, introduce that. I almost felt like I could have even used like a bit more of that storyline if it was going to be in there. So yeah, I'm just curious how important that was to you, and if you considered that being a bigger element, or when that kind of came into the storyline. Oh, and I'm Natasha.
I'm going to leave it facing you so you can respond to the room.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that because it's clear that the timeline of the fictive present of the novel is, because, there's the reference to certain technologies that we really only had in the past 15 years, like GPS and things like that with the cell phone. When you think about this taking place in the past 10 years or so, and the lands, the geographical location where Mackenzie's community is, you can't not talk about the presence of the oil field there. It would be kind of disingenuous to do so. So the reason why it's like introduced when she goes home, and it doesn't appear beforehand, because it wouldn't occur to Mackenzie to think about it. she is living, you know, quite isolated in Vancouver and has for the past 3 years. And when she goes home, she's really struck by the changes the land has undergone in the years that she's been away, because she hasn't been there to see it. And, you know, a lot of this, because the land is certainly a character as well, she feels really guilty about the fact that she's like, I don't feel like I know this place anymore, and it's her homeland. And also she sees the destruction that land extraction has. And also, you know, it's also a very complex thing for communities and for Indigenous peoples living within that, where, you know, these industries are also like a source of like where your survival, that's how you're living, that's your source of income to feed your family. So it was important to include, and it was also a difficult incorporation because of the complexity of those layers. I think that Billy Ray Belcourt in A Minor Chorus, his most recent novel, I think does a really beautiful job of talking about the complexity of living on the prairies as an Indigenous person in the midst of the oil field industry and the tar sands. And yeah, I if I'm being honest, I think about that element of Bad Cree a lot. And if there's anything that I think like, yeah, I wish I had a bit more. I feel like that could be an entire novel in itself, if I'm honest, because there's a lot there, and maybe one day it will be. But yeah, it's a lot to try and say and do with a, you know, half a novel, and also it couldn't not be there. So
Thank you. Anybody else? You got to come closer because she won't be able to hear you. Sorry, not a far walk. It's just an awkward one. Okay, you can go there.
Okay.
She's right here. Yep.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is about the tiny tasting of the Cree language in the book, like the fact that you named the dog a Tim. Like a
yeah.
And also, I have to admit that I did audio book just for how my personal life is going right now, that I had to listen versus reading pages. So I feel like I might have even missed some of the Cree language. So I know that you have the chapters, but I was just wondering about your choice of how much or how little Cree language that you had included in the story. And then also just I have some experience with the big character at the end of the story, and just speak a little more to that, because I was texting Sam, and I have a visual because I experienced something at a powwow, and I had to ask what was that, and explain what it was. And so then I definitely knew that you had written horror, because because like your book actually still kind of just terrifies me. Like when I was done, I was like, okay, yeah, that was a horror. So just wondering if you could chat a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, sorry, what was the first question again? Sorry, can we just go back to that? I'm thinking about the second part.
About Cree language. Yes,
thank you. Yeah, so for I'm a baby Nahiawewen learner. My Cree is not very expensive, but writing in the language is a way that I've felt has given me an opportunity to learn more words. So I incorporated some words in ways that felt, I'm like, this is a pre-millennial person who wouldn't know very much language, but would know some. So I incorporated it where I felt it would be appropriate. Like, what would she have remembered? You know, awasa stum, the words she would hear in her household, and also the words that her kukum taught her for the flowers and things like that. So that's kind of where I made those decisions there. Sometimes it's hard because the Cree language is so relational, and so it's kind of taking just a word and not having the rest of the sentence in Cree can do that word a disservice, because it doesn't have the same sort of effect. So but I still it still felt really important to include, because I really wanted to see Cree in my work, and there's syllabics in it as well in the physical version. And so that's another thing when talking about horror and like what Indigenous horror might look like. You know, we have so many Wetago stories, and they're scary. They're really scary. And so when like a Cree person, or I think in Anishinaabe they're Wendigo, as soon as you see that, you know it's a horror story, and you know there's like a lesson somewhere in there, and you know that there's some kind of teaching. Like, there are things that a Cree person or somebody with like a cultural background will see and know immediately what it is, in ways that somebody who might not know that background will like not know immediately that it's horror for that reason. And I think it's fine for those different interpretations to be there, but I think, when I think of horror stories, and I think about the scariest stories like I heard growing up, those were them. So it was I'm really interested to hear about your experience, but I won't press.
I can tell you.
Can you
I'd love to hear it.
Can you hear her okay from there?
I can't, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
You got to get up again.
Sorry.
No, I was just telling Sam that I went to powwow and they came out and they were wearing like sacks on their heads. Their eyes were like, they just had like ripped, like it was just rips in the mouth. And then they were just dancing around and they were tapping things on that. And then somebody told me after that if they like touched something that belonged to you, they took it. Like, that's theirs now.
Mm-hmm.
But when they came, like, it was just a vibe. It was just a mood. And it was just, it was, and I had taken a friend who had a non-Indigenous friend to powwow for the first time, got her an Indian taco, like, this is going to be really great.
The real experience, yeah.
Yeah, like, you got to have this Indian taco, and we're just enjoying the the singers, the dancers, and then they came, and I had no clue, and I was just like, I don't. But so then I'm just frantically, I'm like, what is happening? What is happening right now? These people, and they came, and to go.
That's so scary.
It was scary.
That's so scary.
Yeah.
Were they like drumming and stuff like that too? Like, not the way to go, but were there and like music happening or anything?
I can't remember. It's been a few. I don't. Everything now for me is before pandemic. And, And baby, I have a toddler.
Oh,
and before, and that was before. So
yeah.
Brains are scrambled now.
Very fair, very fair. Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yep. Yeah, it was.
And your friend was like, never coming back.
Well, no, but we just didn't really know what to think. They just put the look, and so then I described it in a movie to Sam, like that movie. I think it's called Strangers, where they come, and that's how they look, and then I remember that movie in The Stranger, they say, well, why did you come here? And they said, because you were home or because you answered the door or whatever it was. And that's how I felt about that experience too, well, because you were here. Anyway, that's how your book made me feel, like scared. And then, sorry, just to add to this, my daughter, we're leaving the house today. My daughter was talking to the crows like they're besties this morning. And then I was like, nope.
You're like, none of that.
Yeah. So I'm further, like, your book is scaring me, but in such a good way. Really
I'm so glad. Thank you so much for saying that.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for sharing that.
Anybody else questions for Jessica? Or questions online? I know there's some of you on there too. Everyone's just processing. Oh, come on up.
I also thank you for sharing the story of how scared you got. My name is Sean. I love the monstrous and the frightening and the surreal. It was just dreamlike and wonderful. So thank you for this. But there's also lots about loss and grief in this. If I could just say one sentence, it's a beautiful paragraph. I'll just say one sentence of it. In the dishonest light of day, we tried to turn everything over. And it's just this, there's lots of really poignant bits about loss. And I just thank you for that as well. So I appreciated this idea of using the monstrous and the frightful to bring us into a more real relationship, the characters into a more real relationship with death and loss, when we might avoid that or try to gloss over it, anyways, thank you for that.
Thank you. That's I think that's like, that was a very intentional thing as well. I think one of the most horrific things we can experience, like collectively as human beings, is loss. Like losing a loved one is awful. And so thinking about how that feeling of loss can coincide with the monstrous, like a physical monster, I thought was really interesting, because both on their own are really scary, but having to navigate one while also dealing with the other, I think, there's like a complexity there. And there's also like a relationship. I think the ways that we can feel scared sometimes by the monstrous can elicit the same feelings of fear that we might feel in other situations. So yeah, big feelings, big monsters. Thank you.
Could be a tattoo on my back. Anybody else have questions or comments? Anything online? I saw Colina made a comment there. She appreciated the sprinkling of the language and was very well placed.
Oh, thank you.
Jimmy K, do you have a question? I see. Oh, wait, Colina's talking. Oh, she didn't turn on her camera. That's why I didn't know. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. I just have sick children, so I'm off camera, but I really appreciated sprinkling, because it just kind of brought me right back to the past. Just like you said, it really, they were words that are really common in families that don't necessarily get the opportunity to carry on their language. And I really truly appreciated your descriptions of the night and the prairies and our land. It was just beautiful, and it's pictures I still hold with me. But the crows definitely freaked me out. And whenever you hear "wit go," you just know. And it really did bring along a feeling throughout the whole story in my reading with it. So it was just really eerie, even though, it's loving as well. It was really well done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that.
Jimmy K, now you can
go. Well, what's interesting for me is I started it twice and I put it away. And so when it's advertised as horror, I just thought, well, this isn't for me. And then I read an article about your at school, and I think the English writers, the teacher said, you can't use dreams. And you said, yes, I can. And then you went on. And so what's confirmed it for me is I did go back and I am enjoying it. It's very visual, but there's also comfort in the way you describe horror. And so it isn't, you know, that movie type of jump out at you. And I love crows. So I thought that was very important. And I'm glad it turned out the way it did.
Yeah, crows are so interesting and smart and just like very, yeah, they're very cool creatures. So yeah, that's what I mean. I think yeah, people who don't read or don't like horror books or movies and stuff can certainly, when you see a book that is like advertised as horror, and even looking at the cover, like it's very, you know, it's got a nostalgic sort of horror vibe to it. But yeah, I think that Indigenous people sort of write horror a little bit differently. That isn't just, jump scares every scene and like it's propulsive in that way. It's a little bit, it can be a little bit different. So I'm glad that you are enjoying it. I hope you continue to do so.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yes, Natasha.
Do I have to put my hand up or something?
Oh,
it's Colleen.
Colleen, go ahead, and then Natasha would like to know more.
I can wait.
Natasha's just asking Jessica if you can expand on the teacher conversation and about not being allowed to use dreams.
Yeah, I was finishing my MFA in creative writing at UBC, and in one of my classes, prof had given what I think ill-fated advice to never write about your dreams. And he said, because they'll lose your reader, they'll bore your reader. You know, no one wants to hear about your dreams. Don't write about them. And he said it very flippantly, like it's probably a comment, like he probably doesn't think about this at all. And for me, it sparked like immediate outrage because, you know, growing up, I was taught to really listen to my dreams. They were always validated in my family. Like I was never sat down and was like, dreams are important and they're this and this and this. They just were. Like if I woke up and I was like, yeah, I had a dream, and everyone turns to listen. And, you know, then my aunt would be like, oh, maybe stay away from water today. Or like, what do you think that's about? Like really engaging with you about these things. And you know, as I've learned more cultural knowledge and what they mean for Cree people, as you know, dreams as a way of communicating with our ancestors, it's our connection to the stars as star people, to storytelling, to knowledge production. That all validated and made a lot of sense to how I understood dreams my whole life. So to have this person in a position of power and in a position of, you know, I'm an emerging writer just wanting to learn, you know, hearing someone be like, don't do this because you won't be successful. I was just like, I know you're wrong though, you know? So I was like, I'm going to write a short story that centers on dreams, and it's going to be exciting and people are going to like it. And it turns out people do. So, and I'm sure there are people that, you know, that still think like, that's not for me because I don't, you know, and he might be one of those, and that's fine. But I mean, I didn't think that was very good advice. And I still don't think that's very good advice.
That's great. That was like literally the equivalent of hold my beer. Colleen, go ahead with your question.
Well, it was more like, I think, a comment. I really, really liked how you kind of juxtaposed the whole commonplace, like the life of being at home and having all the family and the cousins and the aunties, and everyone's at the house and they're all cooking or they're eating, or then they're sleeping in the same room. And you could just feel this kind of cozy, commonplace hominess. And then it was juxtaposed with that crazy kind of dream and horror, and sort of then saying, you know, we're safer as a community and as a collective and as a group. And then I really liked the that blurring of the dreams and how the dreams were coming to the real world, and the real world was going into the dreams. And it kind of reminded me of the idea now of these parallel universes and things. So it's also almost an acknowledgement that it's not just like we've been very, what would I call it? Unwilling to admit that there might be more than just what we have as our physical selves here. And so I thought that was also really interesting. And even thinking of that movie that won the Academy Awards, the Everything Everywhere All at Once, and there's that leading, right?
Yes.
And so the dream, again, if you acknowledge these dreams as being something other than just a stupid thing like a trick of the mind or something, I really, really, really like that. So yeah, I love this book. And I liked the fact that the crows in the end were actually protectors. And then how you explained it was great when you said she makes a lot of assumptions, and we all obviously make a lot of assumptions. And so I hadn't really thought of that. And yeah, anyway, I thought it was great. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I also I love, thinking about other realities and time, how time works. And because, Cree people think about time very differently too. And so, thank you for those words. That's really lovely. Also just want to note that in the chat, Courtney said that happened with a prof who didn't want you to write fantasy or fairy tales. And that is something very common in academia as well. I feel like my experience was that, everyone really revered like literary fiction, which nothing against literary fiction. Like I think some of it can be really good. But I personally, I love genre, and I love fantasy. I love sci-fi. And those were kind of like looked down on as a literary pursuit, as if like, because more people could like them or something, that they don't have as much literary merit. And I really rebel against, it's not smart enough. And I think that's such a, I really don't agree with it. I think that in, so much of the great fantasy that I've read, the complexity in them is just amazing. Like, I don't think something needs to be, another assumption, absolutely. I don't think something needs to be like hard to read to somehow like be genius. I think that, and I think it's like also like important to enjoy reading and to like have fun doing it too in these ways. And being in the in academia was hard in some ways for those reasons, but I hope things are shifting. I mean, I think that at least in the literary world, we're just seeing so much great work pop up that's not like pure literary fiction, and it's really nice to see that validated.
I also have to note Randy's comment where she says, as a fellow neighborhood crow befriender, she's glad the crows had a comeback in the book.
Yes. Go crow befrienders.
Okay. Any more questions from I have a couple more for her, but any more? Do you have a question, Carla? Yes, okay, I'm going to turn it around. Don't steal my job. You want to host the news too? Okay. Hello again.
Again.
So, you were talking about your next novel earlier in the conversation. What you working on?
I am working on a collection of short stories, actually. So I started with short stories. Like I said, I really love them. And that's my next project. So they're going to be horror, and they're going to be sci-fi, fantasy bents. I'm just going to write into the things that I find exciting, and I haven't completed the manuscript yet. I spent so much time editing this book that I needed a bit of a break, but it's next in the works.
So you're with HarperCollins.
Yeah.
Is the next book with HarperCollins?
They have first read. So they will have the first opportunity to read my manuscript and make an offer, and I can decide whether I want to publish with them or if I want to go somewhere else.
I didn't ask you this, but how did you get published? How did you go from short story to book and ending up? Because I mean, a lot of people on their first book either self-publish or end up with a smaller publisher, and you ended up with one of the big guns.
Yeah, well, I had a really great agent. After the short story was published, I immediately started working on the novel. So the short story went on to win the 2020 Writers Trust Journey Prize, which is a really big prize in Canada. And winners of that receive a lot of recognition. And by the time it won that, I published it in 2019, this short story. And by the time it won it in 2020, I'd already expanded it into the first draft of the novel.
Oh,
so
okay.
I just a lot of this was timing, to be very honest, because it is, for a debut author, it is quite, it's like, I think getting, a big publisher and
it's amazing. Call it what it is.
Yeah, it is amazing. and it's difficult to do for sure. But I did have a lot of timing things on my side. So when I won that award, I already had a draft. So I was like, because I'm getting this recognition right now, I think this is a really good time to query agents because I'm getting this buzz. So I queried a couple agents who already knew about me because of this prize. And then my agent was Stephanie Sinclair, who is now, she's Anishinaabe and was an agent at Transatlantic and then Cook McDermott, and is now like an executive editor at McClellan and Stewart. But at the time, she became my agent, and she was really great in being like, this draft needs these things. Once we have this draft, we can shop it around. And she was just she's like the softest shark ever. Like, she's so kind and wonderful. And then she'd get in these meetings and was just like an auntie. She was like very protective and very like a pillar of strength for me. And so, I had great meetings with my editor, Eamon Ansari, who's not at HarperCollins anymore, but was at the time. And some other editors at other publishing houses as well, smaller ones, independent ones. And then I ended up going with HarperCollins. I really vibed with Eamon. Her and I really had a similar vision, and the way that she wanted to nurture the story to what I wanted it to be was really like what I was looking for in an editor.
What was it like when you saw it on the bookshelf for the first time, like in a store? Not just the copies that get mailed to your house, but when you saw it for sale in a bookstore.
You know what? I actually didn't get my copies mailed to me until like 2 months after publication. There was like a mix up and it went to my old address. So like someone living in my old address got a bunch of free books. So I actually saw it in the bookstores first before getting it in my hands. And it was really surreal. Even now when I see it, I feel it's kind of like an out of body experience where I'm like, is this me actually seeing this? It still feels very strange. I'm sure it will start to feel normal soon. But I'm really busy right now. Like I've been like traveling quite a bit for events. I did a launch in Vancouver. I'm in Toronto right now. I go to Halifax soon. And I think that busyness has sort of like kept my mind off of like really thinking about the fact that I did this thing. And I'm sure I'll have really big emotions about it when I actually sit with that.
So this collection of short stories, does it have a theme to it? And do you have like a due date set for yourself? When do we get to see the next one in bookstores is what I'm actually asking you.
Yeah, it probably won't be until 2025 because publishers will have 2024 already, like it's already scheduled. They already know what's going to be published next year. But I asked my agent, my new agent, as I said, Stephanie moved on and now I'm with Rachel Latofsky. I asked her to give me a deadline of June 1st for a draft because I internal deadlines, I'll just pass them. And, so I asked her to be a little hard on me in that way. So she's going to check in on it then. So hopefully in a couple of years, and they will have a running theme. Yeah. It's going to be, they're going to be separate short stories, but it's going to be generational. So told from the perspective of people within the same family at different periods. Like one might be an ancestor that doesn't even know of the other person. So they're going to be tied together that way, and then likely to place as well. I'm really obsessed with haunted houses right now. And not haunted in like a scary haunted, but like how spaces and how houses and how buildings can hold memory and can hold energy. And so I think it's going to be centered around or at least this a house is going to, the same house will appear in all the stories. It might be a major character, it might be a smaller one, but it will be there too.
So are you a full-time writer now? Is this your career? No, not yet.
I'm not a full-time writer. They do not, being a writer doesn't consistently pay the bills to a point right now where I would be comfortable making it my full-time job. I work at the Edmonton Heritage Council as the Indigenous Initiatives lead. So I actually really love my day job. I get to work with Indigenous organizations and individuals in the city that want to just do heritage projects, like having a hide tanning, or like a culture camp and things like that. So yeah, I get to do really fun things in my day job, and I actually really like it. So I am still writing when I find the time outside of that.
Passion project.
Yeah.
I have to say thank you so much for this. I was so excited to talk to you after this book, because the characters stuck with me, and I didn't write the characters. So when you say the short story stuck with you and that you weren't done with them, I was still thinking about them days afterwards. So I think that that's a testament to your writing, because I don't know these people, but they live in my head now. And I very much look forward to reading whatever you have coming next. And you are Prairie people, which means if you're ever in Regina, let's go for a coffee or something, because I feel like there's a lot of things we have in common and we could talk for hours, but some people in this room probably want to go.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to visit Regina. I've actually never been to Regina, which is absurd considering where I live.
It's a smaller version of Edmonton.
Yeah, I have friends from there that have, it sounds really beautiful. Like, I mean, it looks really similar to where I'm from. So yes. I think I will just be biased in that way, but that's fine.
Come visit anytime. come visit anytime. And thank you so much for this and for the book. And we'll
thank
be
you all
everything.
so much for having me and for engaging with this novel. Like, it still feels so bizarre to like have people talk about it. And I'm like, oh my God, you read something I wrote? I really feel humbled by that. And yeah, I really appreciate you inviting me, and you're all so lovely. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and have a lovely night. And I hope you get some sleep because it sounds like you're busy.
Thank you. Yes, I am going to sleep right now.
Okay. Take care. Bye, Jessica.
Bye, everyone.